Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I want to share with you four of the most disturbing October encounters. Real stories from deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where fall doesn't just bring leaves. It stirs things that don't have names. Out there, the fog hangs like a funeral veil over forgotten trails, and folks still whisper. If you hear your name called in the woods, don't answer. If you're listening late at night, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and comment where you're tuning in from. Who knows? Maybe one of these stories began not far from your own home. Now then, let's begin. Some memories live in your body more than your mind. I can't remember the name of the church anymore, or even the exact road that leads to the cemetery behind it. But I remember the feeling of cold dirt against my back and the way the air smelled like rust and dry leaves. And I remember the sound my coat made when it happened, and how I couldn't do a damn thing but watch. It was late October, maybe a week before Halloween. I was 15, bitter, restless, and cracked open from the inside out. My brother had died 3 months earlier in a car accident, and my parents had fallen apart so fast it felt like they'd evaporated. After the funeral, I got sent to live with my Will and my ba in the hills outside Clear Creek, Pennsylvania. They took me in without saying much. Will was the kind of man who worked with his hands and didn't talk about feelings. He'd built half the house he lived in, cooked everything in cast iron, and taught middle school shop class in town. He loved me, the only way he knew how, through quiet rules and hard expectations. I didn't make it easy. I was angry all the time, like the air itself offended me. I started skipping school, locking myself in the shed, breaking whatever I could just to feel something sharp and loud. I wasn't proud of it then, and I'm not now, but that's who I was. My grandmother tried, in her own soft way. She'd leave food by my door, rock slow on the front porch with a quilt across her knees, whispering things only the mountain women ever said. Will didn't yell often, but when he did, it landed like a hammer. That night, it started over something small, mud on the floor, I think, but it escalated fast. He said I had to start acting like I gave a damn, like I wasn't the only one who'd lost someone. I told him he didn't get to say that he wasn't family, not really, and I meant it to hurt. He stood there, fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight. For a second I thought he might hit me, but he didn't. He just turned his back. That somehow felt worse. So I grabbed my coat and I left. The screen door slammed behind me, and I walked into the woods without thinking. I didn't take a flashlight. I didn't care. I knew the trails behind the house like the lines on my palm. I'd walked them angry before, but never at night. There was no wind that night. No frogs. No crickets. Not even the sound of water running down the ravine like usual. Just the crunch of dry leaves and the faint taste of smoke in the air. The moon was hiding, and the trees looked taller than I remembered. I found myself at the edge of the old cemetery before I knew I'd gone that far. The gate was half fallen. One stone, cross cracked, clean down the middle. Most of the graves didn't even have names anymore, just initials, or worn carvings nobody could read. It was a place kids dared each other to visit in the summer, but never alone, especially not in October. I walked between the graves until I reached the one I always stopped at. It wasn't family, just a flat stone half sunk into the ground that read J.M. 1903. 1917. That kid had died younger than I was, and for some reason, that had always stuck with me. I sat beside it and tried to breathe, but the breath wouldn't come. I thought about my brother, how fast it had happened, how I never got to say goodbye. I thought about Will's face, the way he turned away like he'd given up. Something in me broke open and I screamed. Loud. Stupid loud. Just this raw, ragged sound that tore out of my chest, like I was trying to rip the sky open. And that's when I heard it. A shift. A breath. A shape moving just past the tree line to my right. I stood up fast. heart hammering, but I couldn't see anything in the dark. Then he stepped out from between the headstones. A man in a long coat, hood pulled low, holding something long in one hand. I thought it was a cane. Then I saw the way he held it. I tried to back away. I think I even said something. Maybe, hey, or stop. But he moved fast. Too fast. He swings. Hard. It hits me behind the ear. And the world turns black. When I came to I couldn't move. My back was pressed against something wet and cold. And it took a second to realize it was earth. The smell hit next mud. Rot. And the sharp, metallic bite of old blood. I blinked hard against the dark and felt a sharp sting along the back of my neck where he must have hit me. I wasn't tied, but I couldn't move much either. My body was wedged deep, like I'd been dropped into something narrow and narrow on purpose. When my fingers brushed the edge, I realized I was lying inside a hole. Not a ditch, not a trench, a grave. Panic came in slow, like frost. I clawed at the sides, but the dirt was wet and packed. My boots slick with mud. There was no lid, no coffin, just a rectangle of dug-up ground and me at the bottom of it. Every few minutes I thought I heard footsteps, but they never came closer. Just far-off crunching, like someone circling the stones above. I yelled once, weak and hoarse. Then, again, louder, until my throat burned. Nothing. No answer. My arms shook so hard, I thought I'd pass out again. And just as I was about to give up, I heard it, a voice calling my name. Rough. Sharp. Familiar. It was Will. I don't know how he found me. Maybe he followed the trail I left. Maybe he just knew where I'd go. Either way, I heard his boots hit the leaves above. And a second later, his face leaned over the edge of the hole. Jesus. Nate, he said, his voice breaking. Don't move. I've got you. Risings, then a pin. I don't remember what I said back. I think I just sobbed. He knelt, reached down with both arms, and started to haul me out. The dirt shifted under my boots, but he pulled hard, teeth gritted, until I was half out of the hole, mud up my sleeves and stuck in my throat. That's when the sound came behind him. Heavy, fast, not running, but stomping. Will spun, still holding me with one hand. And I saw it, the same man, coat dark and soaked through, face shadowed, arms raised. Will shouted and shoved me back with one arm, yelling for me to stay down. Then the fight started. I can't explain the noise. It wasn't clean. It was messy and brutal. Fists and grunts and something breaking that didn't sound like a branch. I tried to get up, but I slipped and fell hard on my arm. By the time I crawled out of the hole, it was over. The man was gone, just like that, disappeared into the trees like smoke. And Will, he was on the ground, curled over, holding his arm like it wasn't part of him anymore. Later, at the hospital, they told me the break was too bad. The forearm bones had snapped and twisted. An infection set in fast from the wound. They had to take it just below the elbow. I never asked him what happened in those few seconds, what he saw, what he felt, but I still remember the look in his eyes when I sat by his hospital bed, useless and pale, and he told me, "None of this is your fault." They're wanting with their uhs. He was wrong. It was my scream that brought that thing, my anger that sent me out there, and my damn silence, all the months before, that made Will think he'd failed me. I carry that weight with me even now. People ask why I flinch when I hear dirt being shoveled, or why I leave flowers at a grave that doesn't have my name on it. They don't understand. But some nights, cold, October ones, when the sky goes still and the woods feel too quiet, I can hear the sound of boots crunching just beyond the trees. And I remember how long it took me to climb out of that grave. I never thought I'd agree to go ghost hunting, but when Caleb asked, I didn't have the courage to say no. We were two students from the same small college in eastern Kentucky, both looking to escape our routines for a weekend. I majored in environmental science. Caleb studied folklore and mythology. While I treated those topics like academic curiosities, he treated them like living truths. That difference had never caused a fight. Until that October. We set out early, just after dawn, with packs half full of supplies and full of talk. Caleb told me about the old legends of our region, how his grandmother used to whisper about a woman in white who walks at twilight, called the Hill Widow, whose sorrow was said to bind the souls of the lonely. He said she calls names softly at cabin windows, luring people outside. I smiled and nodded, telling him sounds spooky, but also thinking he was overreaching. Still, he was the one pushing me to get out of my dorm and into the woods. By mid-morning, we left the maintained trail and took a ridge path Caleb had researched. The leaves were gold and rust, the air crisp with October's bite, and the forest felt quiet. Too quiet. Caleb carried not just a map and compass, but a small recorder, old booklets of local ghost stories, and a handful of tokens, offering charms, etc. I carried a water bladder, extra socks, and a headlamp. We walked in comfortable silence for miles. He'd occasionally glance at me and say, "Do you feel it?" I'd force myself to answer, "Just tired." They'd call goes he was forgot it. Around noon, we crested a low ridge and came upon two figures emerging from a side hollow. They looked like hikers. Boots, packs, jackets, but they walked with a deliberate posture, scanning the woods. The taller one raised a hand in greeting. The shorter one nodded. They introduced themselves as Shane and Owen. Shane's eyes glinted when he heard Caleb mention folklore. "You into exploration and old tales too?" he asked, shifting his pack. Owen stayed quiet, giving me a slow nod. We exchanged stories for an hour. Shane was a journalism major, into urban legends and paranormal podcasts. Owen studied architecture, but used his off weekends to explore abandoned places. They explained they were heading toward a cluster of cabins in the woods, a known ghost town site, with whispered stories of vanishings and whispers at night. Caleb's ears lit up, and he asked if maybe we could join. I hesitated, but Shane said, "We're better together than separate. Just two pairs, exploring is safer." That line, oddly, sank into me. We merged packs and plans, deciding to reach the cabins by nightfall. As we walked, Shane recited one of the folklore variants of the Hill Widow, how she was a betrayed wife who set her home ablaze and died inside. And since then her spirit was said to remain, calling out to those who wander near her old place. Sometimes the sound of whispering women or shifting cloth is heard in old cabins just before someone disappears. Caleb watched me as he told it and softly asked, "Do you believe this might be real?" I shook my head but didn't speak. We reached the first cabin at dusk. It was weathered, its windows dark, its porch sagging, vines crawling up its siding. We set camp in a clearing nearby, near an old fire ring. Shane and Caleb dragged out cameras, flashlights, and recording gear. Owen prefaced, "No phones. No distractions. Let's see what we pick up tonight." I protested softly, but the combined enthusiasm of Caleb and Shane broke down my resolve. I agreed under protest, leaving my phone in the pack bag beside a rock. We ate a simple meal, and a chill wind drifted through the trees. As darkness gathered, Shane and Caleb lit a small fire and we sat close. Owen kept watch toward the tree line. Shane asked Caleb to tell the Hill Widow legend again, in detail. The crackle of flames and the forest hush made it feel real. When Caleb described the way she calls you softly, "John, come home," I swallowed hard and felt a pull in my chest. Later, when we were quiet, I thought I heard something, a name, not loud, barely a breath. "Reed." I froze. The wind shifted. Owen's flashlight flickered. Shane looked past me, eyes wide, into the window of the cabin. A faint sigh or whisper, just for a moment, and then silence. The forest swallowed every other sound. I wanted to tell myself it was the wind, that whatever I thought I'd heard, my name, spoken soft and distant, was just my nerves playing tricks. Caleb didn't mention it. Neither did Shane. Maybe they hadn't heard anything. But Owen had stiffened just slightly. His eyes stayed locked on that dark window, and he didn't blink for a long time. We agreed to split into pairs to check the cabins while we still had a bit of moonlight. Caleb wanted to go with Shane. I didn't like that. Not because I didn't trust Shane, but because I didn't want to be paired with Owen, who barely said 10 words since we met. But I said nothing. The truth was, I didn't want to go into any of those buildings. And when Caleb turned to me and said, "We'll be back soon. Just want to test the recorder inside," I just nodded. So Caleb and Shane went off toward the larger cabin at the edge of the clearing. Owen and I took a narrower path toward a smaller, half-collapsed cabin nearer the creek. The path was slick with wet leaves. The forest around us was unnaturally still, as though it paused to watch. Owen's flashlight beam wavered as he scanned the broken siding and sagging roofline. Inside, stale air pressed in. Everything was coated with dust and rot. We passed a table with an old teacup tipped over. No footprints except our own. No sounds except distant drip of water. I swallowed hard. "You feel that?" Owen whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what that was. Then came a soft thump behind us. A floorboard, or a branch. Before I could turn, a second, heavier sound echoed from deeper in the cabin. Owen froze. "That's not an animal," he said quietly. Too slow, too deliberate. We both edged toward darkness beyond the doorway. We retraced steps toward camp, calling for Caleb and Shane. No answer. We waited 10 minutes, then 20, listening to silence grow louder. Then, heavy footsteps. Shane stumbled into view, blood on his forehead, his eyes wild. She took him. He gasped. I saw her. His legs buckled, and he collapsed. Owen and I helped him up and half-dragged him toward camp. Shane muttered about a woman in a corner, watching, unmoving. He claimed he heard Caleb's voice, twisted and wrong. But when he retraced it, the room was empty. No doors open. No sign of Caleb. Shane was still half-conscious on the tarp, mumbling incoherently, his face pale. Just as I bent to check his pulse again, a sound drifted in from the woods. Weak, strained, like someone calling from far away underwater. "Help," it rasped, barely a whisper. But I knew that voice. "You heard that, right?" I asked. Owen nodded, slowly. "That's Caleb." It wasn't just the name. It was the tone, pleading, thin, like it was being pulled apart in the wind. I stared into the dark. Every part of me said, "Stay put. Wait until morning." But something deeper refused. "I have to go back." Owen grabbed my arm. "Reed, come on. Man, we need to wait for help. It's not safe out there." "He's out there," I said. "If it were you, I'd want someone to come back." For a second, Owen looked like he was going to argue again. Then he cursed under his breath and nodded. We left Shane where he was, bundled in the emergency blanket, and made our way back into the woods. The rain had stopped, but everything dripped. The trees creaked overhead. The cabin came into view again, half swallowed by mist. Just before we reached the clearing, Owen stopped dead. "Look," he whispered, pointing upward. In the second-floor window of the cabin, a pale figure stood, barely visible. A woman, I thought, hair long, white gown trailing, still as stone. Then lightning flashed, and she was gone. We stood there, neither of us speaking. Then I pushed forward, heart hammering. The door creaked open just like before. Inside, the air was heavier now, sour, wet, thick with mildew. Our boots left prints in the dust. "Caleb," I called. "It's me." We're here? A sound above. A creak of floorboards. I pointed my flashlight toward the staircase. I'll check upstairs. Stay down here, I told Owen. He nodded, hesitated, then moved toward a side room, slowly scanning it. I took the stairs, each step groaning. The hallway upstairs was short, 3 doors. I opened each in turn. Empty, silent, cold. Then, from below, a thud, a scrape. Owen shouted. I turned and bolted down the stairs. As I rounded the last step, I saw Owen on the ground, face contorted in panic, his body being dragged toward a darkened doorway. No one was there. Nothing visible was pulling him, just his legs scraping across the floor, fingers clawing at the wood. I grabbed his arms and pulled hard. For a second, it was like tug-of-war with the air itself. Then whatever grip had him slipped loose, and we both tumbled back. Owen screamed, clutching his ankle. Something grabbed me, he gasped. It was God. It was cold. We didn't wait. I slung his arm over my shoulder, dragging him out into the woods. We stumbled through trees, mud sucking at our boots. Shane was still where we left him, barely conscious. I don't remember falling asleep, only the spinning lights waking me up. Rangers, medics. Someone had called them. Maybe another hiker heard the scream. We were pulled out of the woods by morning. They found Caleb unconscious in the cellar of a different cabin nearby. His clothes were soaked, covered in dirt, face scratched. He couldn't remember how he got there. Just muttered one word when they tried to question him, widow. Shane had a mild concussion. Owen's ankle was fractured in 2 places. I walked out without a scratch, but I haven't stopped shaking since. People asked questions, but nobody had answers. No signs of another person. No prints. No hand. No woman in the window. But I remember. I know what I saw. And sometimes, when October rolls around and the wind scrapes the trees just right, I hear that voice again. Read. The first night I heard it, I'd already been in the cabin a week. It was mid-October, and the storms had been rolling through the mountains without a break. The kind of rain that felt old, like it had been falling long before I showed up and would keep on falling long after I left. I'd grown up with weather like that, but not with what came alongside it. My name's Eli Harper. I was 28 then, coming off a stretch of bad luck that dropped me right back where I started. After getting fired from a construction job outside Charleston, I had no real money, no backup plan, and no choice but to move back in with my mom in Harlan. I told myself it was temporary, but every week I stayed there made me feel like I was shrinking. I'd lasted 2 months before I started coming apart. There's something about losing your own space that eats at a man, even if no one says it out loud. My mom wasn't cruel, but everything in that house reminded me I'd failed. I felt like a grown child playing pretend. Cody, a guy I'd known from school, called me up one evening. He said he had a cabin his uncle had left him, way out past Line Fork, almost to the Tennessee line. He only used it in summer and offered it to me for the winter if I kept an eye on the place. No rent. Just make sure the pipes didn't freeze and no animals moved in. I said yes without thinking too hard. 4 days later, I packed up my mom's old Tacoma and left before the next storm could trap me again. The road narrowed the deeper I drove. Gravel, turning to packed dirt, then soft mud. By the time I reached the last turnoff, it felt like I'd dropped off the edge of the map. The cabin sat about a half-mile off the road, tucked into a rise between 2 wooded slopes. It was older than I expected, but clean and dry. The porch sagged a little, and the chimney looked patched, but it held heat well enough. One side looked out over a shallow creek, swollen with yellow leaves riding fast water, and the woods came in close, like the house had been left there on purpose and forgotten. Inside, it smelled of cedar, wood, ash, and damp wool. There was a fireplace, Two couches, a kitchen with old propane burners and cast iron pans that hadn't been used in a while. Cody had left a stack of wood under the eaves and a few jars of matches on the mantel. That first week, I settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. I'd make coffee in the mornings and sit near the window, watching fog roll through the trees. When the rain let up, I'd walk a little ways up the ridge. Never far, just enough to feel like I still existed. Evenings were for books, canned soup, and the sound of fire and rain fighting for attention. I started cracking the back window at night, just a little, so I could fall asleep to the sound of the storm. I told myself it was harmless, just a bit of fresh air, a small freedom. I think now that was the moment I opened the door to it. Whatever it was, I think once it knew I was listening, it decided to listen back. The first thing I noticed was a scratch on the inside of the door frame. I didn't remember it from when I moved in, but it wasn't fresh either. Then came a night when I heard 3 taps on the kitchen window. Just that. 3. Slow and hollow. I told myself it was a branch, maybe blown loose. I didn't check. If you're ever lucky enough to be alone in the woods, don't open your windows at night. Not even a crack. Not even for the rain. On the 7th night, I fell asleep on the couch with the fire low and the window still open an inch. Around 4 in the morning, I woke to the sound of something breaking. It wasn't loud, more like a bulb cracking or ice shifting in a glass. I sat up, and the first thing I saw was the floor near the fire. There were footprints. Muddy, clear. Not mine. They started under the open window, the one right behind where I'd been sleeping. Whoever made them had stepped over me. The prints crossed the floor to the second couch, stopped, then turned toward the kitchen. Whoever it was had come in, stood above me while I slept, then sat across the room and watched. After that, they walked into the dark. I didn't move. I couldn't. The air in the cabin felt wrong, like it had been emptied out and filled with something else. Then I heard the breathing. It was coming from the kitchen, fast, shallow, somewhere between crying and gasping. It didn't sound human. I reached for the poker near the fireplace and crouched down. My legs were already going numb. When I shifted my weight, I bumped the wall behind me. The breathing stopped. It shoots from the kitchen in a blur, bent low, limbs wide, moving too fast, too smooth. It launches through the window and disappears into the trees. I slam the window shut, heart hammering. That is when I see them. 2 pale eyes out past the tree line, glowing, still, watching me. I lock every door, every window, pile furniture in front of the porch screen, and wait for daylight. The kitchen is a mess. 2 glasses are shattered on the floor, and one has a black smear on the rim. Sticky and bitter smelling. I do not clean it. I just sit there, awake until morning. By sunrise, my bags are by the door, but I didn't leave. I sat with my keys in my hand, jacket on, and told myself it was just fear, just a bad dream, maybe some animal blown off course by the storm, something real, something ordinary. I kept repeating it like prayer. I walked the property line before lunch, just to prove to myself the world still worked the way it was supposed to. No tracks in the mud, no prints in the grass, nothing but fog and water running off the roof. That night, I lit no fire. I boiled water but didn't eat. I locked every door, every window, stuffed towels in the cracks, and put a chair under the knob. I told myself one more night would prove it wasn't real. Around midnight, I started to nod off. The storm had died down to a slow tapping, and the cabin was finally still. I told myself that was a good sign, that whatever it was had moved on. Then I heard breathing again. This time, it came from upstairs, not the creak of wood or the wind in the roof. Breathing, slow at first, then sharp, like someone gasping for air in the dark. I held still, listened. Then came the sound of something moving down the stairs. Not walking, crawling, the thump of weight hitting each step, a hand, then another, then a pause, then the next, closer each time. It reaches the bottom stair and pulls itself into the room. Arms first, back bent in a way that looks broken. Its head is low to the ground. It charges at me with no sound. No scream, just the slap of limbs on wood. I shove the chair, fling open the front door, and run into the dark barefoot. I do not look back. The trees whip past. The rain stings my face. I hear it chasing, snapping branches, dragging itself fast behind me. I don't know where I'm going. I just run. Somehow, through the rain, I see headlights. Cody's truck is just ahead. He must have come early, maybe out of worry, maybe something else. I don't remember reaching him. Only the sound of the door slamming behind me and the truck peeling off through the mud. We didn't talk on the drive back. He never asked me what I saw. I think he knew better. Cody boarded up the cabin by the end of the week. Said it was falling apart anyway. Too damp. Too far out. I let him tell it that way. I never corrected him. I moved to Knoxville the next month. Picked up odd work. Got myself together. Mostly. But every fall, when the storm clouds start stacking above the ridgeline and the thunder rolls through the hollers slow and deep, I remember the sound of its breathing. The way it crawled. The way it waited. And I don't open my windows anymore. There's something about the first real storm of October that still gets to me. I don't mean fear. Not at first. I mean that feeling in your chest when the wind shifts and the sky turns that sickly gray-green, and the air smells like damp rock and ash. It's something I've known since I was a kid growing up in Letcher County, back when the mountain still echoed like it was alive. My name's Dale, and 3 autumns back, my wife Rachel and I agreed to watch our niece and nephew while their parents drove up to Cincinnati for a work retreat. It was just for 4 days. Rachel had always loved kids. We used to teach 3rd grade before we moved out here for good. We never had children ourselves. But when Micah and June came to stay, it was like the house finally filled out. We live in a house that used to be my father's, built out near what used to be the old Lyman coal site, long since shut down. The roads aren't marked out here, and once you lose the ridge trail, you'd better know the smell of your own chimney smoke if you ever want to find your way back. The backyard slopes off into second-growth woods, thick with underbrush and old runoff channels. Most folks wouldn't think to build here, but for us, it's peace. The kids arrived on a Thursday, bags full of Halloween candy and boots too clean for real walking. They were city kids, raised in Lexington, but curious and wide-eyed enough to make the trip fun. Micah, the older one, asked about everything, why the porch roof sagged, what the stain was on the basement door, if bears ever came up this close. June was quieter, always holding Rachel's hand, always watching the trees like she expected something to walk out of them. That weekend was dry and cold, enough to wake you up sharp in the mornings. Leaves came down steady, building in piles along the ditch. On Sunday morning, the radio crackled with the local forecast thunderstorm pushing in from Pikeville, supposed to hit before nightfall. Rachel and I both smiled at that. We'd always liked storms, always watched them roll in like a show, wrapped in blankets with the lights out. I think that's what made it all feel safe at first. Familiar. That afternoon, Rachel lit the fireplace and made spice cider while the kids played cards on the floor. Around 7, the wind started to rise, and I remember Micah pressed his face to the back screen door and said, "It's coming." We stepped out just as the first drops hit the porch roof. Big and cold and full of that metallic smell storms always carry in the hills. The porch out back faces the woods, with maybe 40 yards of slope before the tree line. Beyond that, it's just dark. No neighbors. No road. I had the shortwave radio humming low on the windowsill, catching some gospel from West Liberty and faint crackles of old country drifting in between stations. The wind pressed through the trees like it had a purpose. We were sitting out there, me, Rachel, and the kids' hoods pulled up, mugs warm in our hands, watching lightning break above the ridges. Every so often, the whole tree line would flicker bright white, then go black again. We all stayed quiet, just listening. Then June pointed. Her voice was soft, but clear. "Uncle Dale," she said, "there's somebody down there, in those saying." At first, I thought she was playing around. Kids see shapes. Storms make shadows. I squinted where she pointed, toward a cluster of sweet gum trees about halfway down the hill. Another flash came, and this time I saw it too. A shape. Still. Upright. Not a tree. Not a stump. It looked like a person, standing half behind one of the trunks. Just far enough to be unclear, but close enough to be watching. My stomach went tight. The kids stared too, wide-eyed, silent. I told them to go inside and have Rachel flip on the backyard floods. They didn't ask questions, just slipped through the screen door without a sound. I stayed put, eyes locked on the trees. When the lights came on, the backyard lit up in hard white, and there was nothing there. No shape, no figure, just wet grass and leaves blowing across the yard. I walked out to the first few steps of the hill, looked for prints, looked for movement, but there was nothing but the storm. I told myself it was a trick of the eyes. Maybe a deer, maybe a lean tree caught wrong in the flash. But the kids had seen it too. And worse than seeing it was not knowing where it went. Back inside, I locked the doors without saying much. Rachel asked what happened, and I just said we thought we saw someone, but it turned out to be nothing. She looked worried, but nodded. I hated lying to her, but I didn't want the kids to spend the night scared. We made popcorn, put on one of those old Halloween movies where the monster is clearly just a guy in a suit. The kids laughed. Rachel laughed. I kept looking out the back windows. Around 10, we tucked them in upstairs, one in each of the guest beds, and told them to holler if they needed anything. The storm hadn't let up, and the power blinked once while I brushed my teeth. I left the hall light on just in case. 15 minutes later, I heard the soft pad of footsteps on the stairs. Micah was standing there, pale as paper, one hand gripping the banister. He looked right at me and said, "Someone knocked on my window." And to the crew, I felt my whole body go cold. His room faced the backwoods. No porch, no ladder, just a window 6 feet off the ground, and nothing behind it but forest. I told Rachel to stay put, grabbed the flashlight and the old shotgun my dad kept in the closet, and went up to check. What I saw there still sits heavy in my mind. And that was only the beginning. I stepped into Micah's room with the flashlight angled low, heart thudding hard in my ears. The power had gone out completely by then, and the only light in the room came in short pulses from the lightning outside. The window was fogged at the corners from the warmth inside. The rest, clear enough to see the silhouette of the trees. For a moment, nothing seemed out of place. I moved toward the glass. Slow, careful, trying not to startle the boy who stood just behind me. The next flash lit up the whole yard again, and that's when I saw it, clear as day, or as close to it as lightning ever gets. A man's face, pressed flat to the glass, pale, expressionless, wet from the rain, just inches from where I stood. I shouted, loud, raw from the gut. Micah cried out behind me as I grabbed the shotgun and bolted downstairs. Rachel yelled after me, but I was already tearing through the back door, rain hitting sideways and thunder rolling like it meant something. I ran barefoot around the side of the house, flashlight sweeping through wet leaves and mud, looking for movement. And I saw it, a figure slipping past the edge of the porch, coat hood up, moving quick but not frantic, like it knew the place, like it had done this before. I shouted again, raised the gun, but the shape turned the corner and was gone before I could even lift the light high enough to follow. I kept running. Mud sucked at my heels. Rain soaked through my shirt, and every step I expected to trip over him or worse. But the space behind the house was empty, just wind and water and branches thrashing. I circled the house twice before the storm finally started to slow, my breath fogging in the cold, the shotgun heavy in my hands. Back inside, the kids were huddled with Rachel in the front room. Nobody said a word for a while. We just sat there, soaked and silent, listening to the wind knock against the windows and the house creak with the weight of it. When it finally got quiet again, we brought blankets down and kept the kids with us on the couch. Nobody went back upstairs. We left the lights off even when the power flickered back. We just listened, waited. But nothing else happened that night. The next morning, the storm had passed and the trees looked calm again, like they hadn't been hiding anything at all. We walked the edge of the yard and found footprints, real ones, deep and clear in the mud beneath Micah's window. No shoes, just bare soles, long and narrow. We measured them. They didn't match mine, didn't match Rachel's, or either of the kids. We installed cameras after that, reinforced the locks, put new bolts on the windows, and kept the blinds drawn, even in the daytime. I told my brother what happened, but left out the part about the face in the glass. He said we were probably just spooked by the storm. I didn't argue. There wasn't a point. It's been 3 years, and nothing like that has happened again. But every October, when the wind starts shifting and the sky goes that sickly gray, I feel it. The way the trees seem to lean closer, the way the woods go too quiet after a rain. Sometimes I think about the man's face, about how calm he looked, about how he didn't knock loud. Just enough to be heard. Just enough for the boy to come get me. Like he wanted me to see him.